Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that some stories and discussions in this episode of Radiant Resilience may touch on sensitive and potentially triggering topics. These may include themes of childhood trauma, loss of a parent, alcoholism and addiction, adoption and feelings of abandonment, emotional neglect, and physical manifestations of trauma. Our goal is to share real-life experiences in a respectful and empathetic manner, offering insights into the complexities of the human spirit and the journey towards resilience. However, we understand that some content might be difficult for listeners. We encourage you to prioritize your well-being and discretion when deciding to listen. Please remember this podcast is not a substitute for professional advice or support. If you find yourself needing assistance, we urge you to seek help from qualified professionals or trusted support systems. Your mental and emotional health is important to us. Thank you for your courage and for joining us in a space of understanding and compassion. Welcome back, everyone, to Radiant Resilience. I have Ann Hince with me here today, and I'm really excited to chat with her and get to know her a little bit more. When Ann was 19, she woke up one morning to find her mother dead in her bathroom. 20 years later, the tears from that trauma were still just under the surface. Ann found a simple technique that helped her release these emotions, but she went further and can now put her awareness inside her body and has changed the bone structure of her skull and grown 3/4 of an inch at age 58. Ann has found that seeking out our truth, what we truly feel, and accepting those feelings is the key to inner peace. Ooh, this is going to be a very interesting conversation, Ann. Thank you so much for being here. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thanks for coming on. I am going to let you go ahead and start from wherever you want to start about your life journey and share whatever you're comfortable feeling with that. Feel whatever you feel comfortable sharing with us.
Okay, there's plenty I could share. I think most of us have traumas from childhood,
Yeah.
so I don't necessarily have more or less than anyone else. I just worked through them as much as I could once I realized I needed to change. I had to change.
Mm,
But some of those things were I was adopted at 6 weeks old. And
okay.
actually, prior to that, I was actually born with my right foot up against my right shin. So my
Okay.
whole body was twisted and torqued.
Oh.
I've had scoliosis my whole life. So I had to have kind of physical therapy for those first few weeks. And then at 6 weeks old, I was handed over to a family.
Oh, wow.
And they had already adopted a little boy. So they had a 2-year-old boy. And then they adopted another little girl.
Mm-hmm.
And that birth mother changed her mind. So they had to hand that
Oh.
little girl back. And I was the
Mm.
replacement in the family for that little girl that they
Okay.
handed back. So there was already trauma going on in the family at that point.
Yeah, it's 6 months, you said, or 6 weeks?
6 weeks.
6 weeks. Yeah. And yeah, I have heard, I need to do a podcast episode on adoption of people who were adopted because there seems to be a lot of feelings of abandonment there.
Yeah, I don't think you can be adopted and not have feelings of abandonment.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and they came out for me later in my life too.
Sure.
Yeah, so that was the start. And then at 6 months old, we moved to Barbados. It was the first country we lived in. By the age of 16, I'd lived in Barbados, Sierra Leone in West Africa, Hong Kong and Bahrain and England. I went back and forth to England.
Wow. Were you military family then?
No, my dad worked in telecommunications.
Okay.
Yeah,
Moved you all
so
over the place.
yeah, which has its own kind of traumas too, right? Because you could never keep friends, at least back then, before
Yeah.
social media, before phones, before cell phones. There was no way
Yeah.
to keep track of friends, so you had to make new friends everywhere you went.
Mm, yeah.
But anyway, in the midst of that, when I was around 4 or 5, we had a house fire, and
Mm.
I was the one who woke up and saw the flames coming through the bedroom wall and
Oh
had to
my
alert
gosh.
everyone. So that was a trauma, especially because I went to the top of the stairs. My bedroom was upstairs. My dad was downstairs in the kitchen listening to the radio. So he didn't hear the flames or didn't hear neighbors shouting
Oh
to
my
try and get his
goodness.
attention. But I shouted downstairs and said, "Dad, there's a fire in my bedroom." And he didn't believe me.
What, do you know
Um,
what caused the fire?
yeah, it was an electrical fault in an iron that had been left plugged in.
Ooh, that's
So,
terrifying. And he didn't believe you.
yeah, he said something like, no, there can't be.
Oh, geez.
When you say something like that to a child, they start to not believe themselves, right? Or not
Yeah.
think that they're trustworthy or whatever. So there were lots of things that kind of went along with that.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I was 9 and we lived in Hong Kong, I was sent to a boys' boarding school in England. So it was my
Oh,
brother's boarding school.
how's that's okay? Girls can go to boys' boarding schools?
They had some day girls that came in during the day for lessons and then they
Okay.
went home at night. But I was the first girl that actually stayed there and my dorm room was in sick bay.
Okay.
So I had a little bedroom there.
Oh,
But
wow.
I was teased mercilessly by these boys,
Hmm.
age range 9 through 13. So I went
Mhm.
there from 9 to 11. So I ended up being scared of boys in that age range.
Oh, yeah.
And then I ended up having two boys.
Oh,
So that was
okay.
part of my healing journey. I had to get over that fear of boys in
Yeah.
that age range. So
Interesting.
that was that set. And then I went to a girls' boarding school. And during my teenage years, both of my parents became alcoholics. They'd always
Mm.
drunk a lot, but at that point they weren't doing very well in their marriage and
Mm.
it was just really bad. And my mother would drink a bottle of sherry a day.
Wow.
So she was really pickling herself.
Mm.
And she ended up getting throat and lung cancer from smoking and drinking.
Oh, wow.
And when I was 19, I did wake up and find her dead on the bathroom floor because one of the tumors had burst in her throat.
Oh, wow. Was she doing treatment?
By the time she went to a doctor and found out, it was too late. No, she didn't
Mm.
even stop smoking.
Oh,
So,
man.
yeah,
And how old were you? I'm sorry.
I was 19.
Oh, geez. That is such an impressionable age, too.
I just stuffed it all. That's what I'd been
Mm.
taught to do throughout life. Was
Yeah.
just hold it on in because I didn't know what else to do because we never talked about emotions. We never talked about what had happened. We talked about my mother having cancer one time. We were
Oh.
told about it and talked about it a very short period of time and then we never discussed it again.
Mm.
And then she died. So I just kept it all stuffed in. And I actually moved to the States when I was 21, so
Hmm.
2 years later. And I was hoping that I'd left it all behind in England,
Hmm.
but it doesn't work that way.
Nope, it's never a geographical thing, right? We think that
Right.
it is. We think, oh, if I move, then I'm going to start over, but it's still you. You're still the same person.
Right. It's still stuck inside. So
Yeah.
I just carried on with life, but I was very reactionary. I was very highly strung. I was afraid on the inside all the time, but I hid it. I hid it very well from people.
Mm.
But it wasn't until I was in my late 30s and had two young boys at that point, and something happened, like a business altercation with two other mothers at my boys' school.
Hmm.
And they told me I'd done wrong. They didn't like this decision that I had made, which I
Hmm.
felt was the right decision. But I could not stop my mind going over and over
Mm.
everything that had happened. And these women were self confident, self assured, authority type women in my mind.
Hmm.
One was from New York, and the other one was just this big personality. And they told me I'd done something wrong. And I just couldn't stop my mind spinning. It took 3 days until I could pull myself out of it. And that's when I
Mm.
realized first, this is not normal.
Yeah.
Most people don't react this intensely to something that really wasn't a big deal when you look back on it.
Mm.
But I also realized it felt a little bit like how I would react when my dad would tell me I'd done something wrong.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. I
Right. So
feel that deeply.
yeah. So that was the
Oh,
little
wow.
opening, the little inkling that maybe my childhood was still affecting me. Because I hadn't
Um,
considered it up to that point, which is
mm,
so funny now to look back on it because there was so much in my childhood that I'd just hidden. And it was all affecting me, but I didn't know it until that point. I didn't think about it until that point. So that was the
mm.
start of my unwinding of all that winding up through childhood.
Yeah. When you moved to the US, did you stay in touch with your family?
A little bit. My dad, yeah, he was in a new relationship. He wasn't drinking as much, but he was still an angry man.
Mm,
And my brother went down the path of my parents. He became
okay.
an alcoholic. He smoked
Mm,
and he's already died. He died a few years ago from
I'm so
multiple
sorry.
organ failure from drinking so much, so
Mm,
long. So, Yeah,
So when your mom passed away, do you feel like, and then you moved here, do you feel like your relationship with your dad and your brother started to separate?
it really started when my mum died. She was the
Yeah.
glue that held us together, and
Mm,
it disintegrated after that. So,
yeah.
but
Well,
I
okay.
also met my birth mother when I was
Oh,
17
oh, that's big.
because she was handed the wrong adoption papers at the adoption.
Mm,
And from instant, she saw our last name and the village that we lived in. And
hmm.
there was only one big employer in that village. And her cousin also worked for the same employer. So she got the company magazine and she worked out which countries we moved to and when we moved there. And so she wrote to my parents when I was 17.
Oh, how was that for you?
That was wild. That was trying, meeting her for the first time was just so emotional. I could not lift my eyes off the floor. I physically couldn't lift
Mm.
my eyes up to look at her for a long time. Yeah, it was, that
So
was,
you met her, she wrote your family, and then you met her?
yeah, yeah. She lives in New Zealand and she came to England to see her parents at the time. Yes, she contacted us and I met her. I met my half brother
Oh, wow.
and I'm still in touch with them.
Okay.
So even though they live in New Zealand, it's a long way away. But
Yeah.
I kind of I had two mothers for 2 years,
Yeah.
and then went back to my birth mother after that. So that's yeah, pretty weird.
Oh, yeah. That's interesting. I'm glad you have a relationship with them though, because sometimes that abandonment, anger, all of that stuff is hard to get past, and that's
Yeah,
good.
she was very open. When she wrote me, actually, she typed up a 10-page letter of everything that happened, all the thoughts that she had, all the ideas she had that we could have moved down to Mexico and just been her and me, just all the different permutations that she had come up with, but she
Mhm.
ended up giving me up for adoption. So it was good to hear all that.
Yeah, maybe give you a little bit more insight into her story and why she felt like she had to do what she did and all of that.
Yes, yeah. And of course, I told her what I'd been through as well. And
Yeah.
I was younger in those days, so I didn't hold back on anything. And I think I probably instilled quite a bit of guilt in her because she thought she was handing me over to a nice life.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. That's what you hope for when you're giving a child up for adoption, I assume.
yes, yeah.
All right. So fast forward to in your 30s and you started realizing how much your childhood had affected you.
Yes. So I didn't know what to do about it at the time, but it was in that time frame that I went to a doctor's appointment. I
Okay.
can't remember why I went to it. No idea. But he happened to be a holistic physician. So he had more tools in his toolbox than most people did, most
Mm-hmm.
doctors did. And he also recognized how stressed I was.
Mm,
So he asked me on a scale of 0 through 10 what my stress level was. Now, I was a stay at home mother with two healthy young children, right? So it shouldn't have been that bad.
mm,
But it was an 8 out of 10. And then he
mm,
asked me why. And that was the question that made me realize, oh, it was finding my mother dead on the bathroom floor when I was 19 because those tears were still just under the surface all those
mm,
years later. So he knew this technique that is called EFT, which is
mm,
short for emotional freedom technique. It's also called tapping because we tap on certain places in our body as we're talking something through. And he tapped with me about my mother's death for about 15 minutes.
mm,
And I walked away from that appointment being able to tell the story in my mind for the first time ever without the tears
mm.
there. And
Wow.
that's when I realized that we hold all those memories and those emotions physically in our body
Mm,
and that we can let them go. So that was
mm.
huge for me.
Yeah. So what did you do after that then?
I went home and I learned everything I could about EFT because it was given away by Gary Craig for free. So
Mm,
anyone could go online and learn how to do EFT. But I still had some skepticism because I was actually a software engineer. I have an engineering mind. I like to know something works before I spend my time on it. I don't want to
yeah.
waste that time. So I wanted to try it out. So at the time, I had a 17-year-old cat at home, and his kidneys were starting to fail.
Mm,
And we'd been told we had to give him a daily saline shot, so an injection of saline solution. And I hate injections and
mm,
needles.
mm-hmm,
So the first time I gave him that shot, my hand was shaking so badly. I knew I wasn't going to be able to do it every day. It was just too stressful.
mm-hmm,
So I thought, let me try out this technique that I had just learned. So
mm-hmm,
I did. I tapped about it So I tapped about every aspect of it, which is something you do with EFT. So I tapped about my hand shaking. I tapped about my fear of hurting my cat with the injection. And I tapped about all the injections I had throughout the years because I've moved all over the world, right? Lots of
Mm-hmm.
injections.
Mm-hmm.
And the next day, the needle slid right in. All
Mm.
that fear that had been living inside of me the day before had totally disappeared. It was just gone. So
Wow.
that's when I realized the power of EFT. And
Mm.
that's when I realized I want to be there. I want to be on the other side of all that fear that I had living
Mm.
inside of me. So that's when I really started using it. So I started noticing during the day when I was getting emotional. That's the first step. You've got to be able to notice that in order to do something about it.
Yeah.
So I'd ask myself throughout the day, okay, how am I feeling now? And do I want to feel this way again? Because if
Mm.
I don't, I need to do something about it. So I would
Yeah.
tap. I would tap. I would bring myself back from whatever emotion it was, frustration or anger or humiliation or whatever. I'd bring myself back to peace. And
Mm.
I noticed I was becoming less reactionary. Really good.
Yeah.
But I wanted it faster and I wanted more, of course.
Don't we all, right?
Right. So I'd
We could
heard
just
of
come
this.
out with some like one-off thing that can solve all our problems. That would
That
be
would be
great.
nice. Yeah. No, but it takes time and
Yes.
determination. And
Yes.
I was determined. I was really determined to change. And I'd heard that you could go back through your childhood or your life and tap on every single thing that had happened. So I did. I
Oh.
wrote down all the traumas that I could think of, all the big traumas, all the little traumas, all the phrases my dad would say or my relatives would say. And I tapped through one each night for about an hour to
Mm.
an hour and a half each night for weeks and weeks until I'd gone through them all. And things just started to change. It was so much fun.
Wow.
I was just not reacting the way I used to react.
Mm-hmm.
So I was becoming peaceful on the inside. And I remember one day in the kitchen, I opened the kitchen door and I thought to myself, it feels like I'm living in a different reality because
Mm.
the thoughts that used to be in my mind used to be very self critical and judgmental of myself and others. And I hated being judgmental. But those thoughts were no longer there. They just
Mm.
weren't coming up anymore. And in their place was nothing. It was just peaceful.
Mm.
And I'd never experienced that before. And it made me
Mm.
realize that those thoughts, those judgments, had been my dad's words that I
Mm.
had taken on as my own and just replayed over and over again. But I
Mm.
couldn't see that until they had gone.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was the journey with EFT. But then things started to change because what I realized EFT is doing, it's opening up the subconscious mind.
Mm-hmm.
And as that happens, it goes hand in hand with a deepening of self awareness. So, one way I noticed that on a smaller scale was something like going through my mother's death. So, I tapped on it more than that one time with the doctor. I went back through the story again and again. And each time I would go through it, there would be more details to the story. And they had been stored inside me before, but I
Mm-hmm.
hadn't been able to access them because they were underneath those bigger emotions.
Mm.
So that's the opening of the subconscious mind.
Yeah.
But as you work through that, or as I worked through that, I realized I became more self aware. So I became aware of my emotions, which I hadn't been aware of before.
Yeah.
Then I became aware of the physical sensations underneath the emotion. Yeah. So if you're feeling frustration, that's just a word, right? A word frustration. What we're doing is we're describing how we're feeling and giving it that word frustration.
Right.
But we can go
What are we?
back and
Mm-hmm.
notice where the frustration is. What does it feel like? Does it feel like tension in the solar plexus, in the rib cage,
Mm-hmm.
in the jaw? Where does it feel inside the body? And that's the self awareness. That's being aware at a deeper level of yourself.
But you have to pay attention to those because I will say I did not start paying attention to my body that much until my 30s. And going on my own healing journey, of course, helps. I think that we all start paying more attention when we're starting to heal versus in the moment. But it's been so fascinating to see. I actually had, when I first started this podcast, I don't know if I've shared this before, but I had a cold and I was so nervous about doing my interviews with a hoarse throat. And that hoarseness in my throat lasted for weeks. I wasn't even sick anymore. And then I ended up figuring out I wasn't speaking my truth in a certain situation. And it was manifesting in my throat and I wasn't being able to speak. And it was so fascinating to like pay attention to that, recognize it. And then I'm like, oh my gosh. Okay. So then I started confronting the situation and it eventually went away. And so I think it's so true that our bodies hold on to so much trauma and whatever's going on in the moment, even not even trauma, past traumas.
And most of the time we just cover it up, right? You could have
Yeah.
taken some medication, right, to hide the symptom,
Yeah.
which wouldn't have actually addressed it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, so that's where my journey continued. I At the point where I was aware of the physical sensations of the emotions, I
Hmm.
didn't feel like I needed to use EFT as much.
Okay.
Mainly because I'd been in a group and the guy in the group, the kind of guru in the group, would always say it's all about feeling your feelings, right? You don't have to meditate, it's all about feeling your feelings. But at the time he said that, I didn't know what my feelings were. But then
Oh,
I became aware of my feelings. And then, okay, so what does it mean to feel your feelings? So I
yeah.
had to work that out because I'd never done it before.
Yeah. It can be a scary thing.
It can be. But I'd already realized that those emotions and the sensations are just energy that's stuck in the body. So
Hmm.
all I have to do is feel them or acknowledge them and allow them to leave, and then they're gone. That helps make me more determined to do it. So
Yeah.
what I realized I would do, I was trying to work it out. What does it mean to feel your feelings? You sit in them, right? You allow yourself to feel them, right? If you're feeling sad, you allow yourself to feel those physical sensations of sadness without tensing against them, without pushing them away. And the only way I could do that was to actually hold myself like a statue and
Mm.
hold my breath and not move, but just focus on those sensations of whatever emotion it was. And then I would take a deep breath and I would think the thought again that would bring up that emotion again and realized it had diminished slightly. So I'd do it again. And I would do it again and again until the emotion had disintegrated, dissolved,
Mhm.
left, which is very similar to the EFT, right? Talking through my mother's story, tapping through my mother's story. I would do it again and again until there was no emotion left.
Mm.
So it's opening up the wound that's
Yeah.
inside, the dis-ease that's sitting inside. You do it again and again until it is gone. So I kept doing that. I'd done all my childhood traumas at this point, right? So I didn't want to do them
Yeah.
again. So I did more collective traumas, like things like 9/11, right? We all went through
Um,
that experience. We all kept things inside from our own personal experience of that collective trauma. So I worked through those. I would bring the memories
mm.
to mind. I was in the Loma Prieta earthquake. I'd bring that to mind and
Oh,
just
wow.
feel it and allow all those emotions to just leave my body.
Hmm.
And during that period, I experienced Kundalini energy, which was a thing in itself.
Hmm.
But once that diminished, once I didn't need that anymore, once it had done what it needed to do, I was able to keep my awareness inside my body after the tension had released,
Okay.
which felt really different. I know it's weird to hear because you never hear about it. That's why I'm sharing my story because
Yeah.
I'd never heard about it.
Yeah.
It wasn't something I knew you could do. So I just started to play with it. Okay, I can do that. So now what do I do? So I would practice and I put my awareness inside. I was working through my abdomen at the time, put my awareness inside, and then I would move my awareness around. And I realized I could feel a place with tension versus a place with no tension.
Mm.
So I would focus on the tension and I would just feel it. Just, I'm not trying to change it in any way. I'm not trying to love it or tell it to disappear or anything. I'm just focusing on it. And I noticed it would release a little bit. So then I would
Mm.
do it again and then again and again. So exactly the same technique, just at a deeper level of self awareness.
Okay.
And I would feel things release. And it wasn't until I got my awareness inside my head, which took many months of working in my
Okay.
torso before I could get my side inside my head. But at that point, I'm close to my ears, which sounds such an obvious thing to say. But when I heard something release, when something released, I actually heard it. I felt
Oh.
it and I heard it. And it sounded and felt like old fabric ripping.
Oh.
And it was a little scary. Yeah, it was a little scary the first time. I was actually
Yeah.
out and I came home and I did some research because I didn't want to be hurting myself. But I
Yeah. Yeah.
realized It was an adhesion in the connective tissue that was releasing.
Oh,
So I thought, okay, that's okay. So I'll just keep doing that.
yeah,
And over time, I would actually feel my skull bones relax. Now, I hadn't known they weren't relaxed before
sure.
until they relaxed. And then I realized,
Yeah.
okay, they were tense and now they're more relaxed than they were. And I would keep doing that. And eventually, I had some x rays taken because I was having orthodontic work all through my 40s. I had orthodontic work. And I looked at the old x rays because I knew things had been shifting. I could feel the changes happening. And then I could see in the x rays that my eye sockets had shifted, aligned. My
Wow.
jaw was way off to the side and it's now much more centered. My neck's always been straight. As I said, I had scoliosis. So it's much straighter than it has ever been in my life. And then I measured myself because I knew I was. We don't measure ourselves when we're older because we know how tall we are.
Yeah.
But when you're looking, when you grow, you realize you're looking at other people and things at a different angle. And I could see that I was. So I had my son measure me and then my husband measure me, and I had grown 3/4 of an inch.
Wow.
So I was always 5'4 1/4, and I really appreciated that 1/4 inch. But now I'm
Yeah.
5'5.
Wow.
So that's the burden. I think if you look at photos of
Hmm.
people when they're young versus when they're old, it tends to be the neck has shrunk,
Hmm.
shortened from the burden that we've been
Oh,
carrying, from the
yeah.
thoughts, the negative thoughts we replay over and over, from those traumas that we're holding inside, from the tears that we've never let go.
Yeah.
We tend to compress over time. And
Mm.
this is releasing that burden and allowing ourselves to decompress. I
Mm.
haven't actually grown, I've just decompressed.
Yeah. That
Yeah.
makes sense with heavy stuff like you're carrying. I felt in the past, a simple example is my wedding. I planning a wedding is no easy feat and it's so stressful. And I remember physically feeling when all the official stuff was done and we were just dancing on the dance floor, like a weight lifted off my shoulders for sure. Like I just felt it release. So I imagine all of our life stressors and traumas, I'm sure, are weighing down on us. So a
Yeah.
lot of older women end up shorter than they were or hunched over or whatever. And you're right. I bet a lot of it is their burdens that they haven't dealt with, especially now because those older generations definitely didn't want to address any of that stuff. So,
They all kept it hidden, right? And
yeah.
and one of the things I learned so much on my journey is that even though we think they're just memories or emotions, we think they're just
Hmm.
in our mind, but
Hmm.
really they're actually held as tension in our connective tissue. It's
Yeah.
actually physical, we're just not aware of it until we've
Yeah.
just done enough work that we become aware of it. So
Yeah.
it's all there, it's all dis-ease stuck inside of us, and we can release it, but it does take work.
Mm. Yeah, that's so interesting. You were talking a little bit before we hit record about the stressors you had as a mother of young children. And I was saying, I think that's something a lot of people can relate to. So, can you talk a little bit about what you were experiencing and stuff like that? And maybe if you recognize some of that stuff through your healing and stuff, what specific things you were targeting to heal that as well?
Sure. I was very anxious always, right? I had
Yeah.
PTSD from my two
Poor
alcoholic parents and
George.
my dad's anger.
Yeah.
So it didn't take much to trigger me. And with two young boys who are very boisterous, I was
Hmm.
being triggered all the time. And
Mm.
when I was triggered, I would say something or do something that would then trigger them. So
Yeah.
things would escalate a lot. And it was just really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So I knew I had to change.
Yeah.
And so that's what I worked with EFT, right? If they were doing something and I was feeling something from it, I would pop myself in the bathroom and
Hmm.
I would tap through it.
Okay.
And when I
Okay.
would go back out, I would be different, right? I would be a different energy and they would pick
Yeah.
up on that, right? So things would change because I had changed, that would help them change.
Yeah. Kids are very intuitive, right? They may not know exactly what's going on in our adult lives, but they can pick up when mom is upset for sure.
They can. Yes, absolutely.
Hmm.
And I would also use EFT with them. right?
Okay.
Because you can use EFT on other people. My youngest son used to have nightmares.
Mm.
I would go up to his room and I would gently tap on his points. I didn't need to say anything because the emotion was already in his body at that point.
Yeah.
I would just tap on his points until he would say to me, "It's okay, Mum, you can go now. I can go back to sleep." That's just one example, but I would tap on them
Yeah.
in different ways, which would calm them down. But I would always work on myself first. So if I was angry or anxious or something, I would tap on myself and bring myself back to peace. And if that didn't help them, then I could come from a place of peace and tap with them. If I did it before I was at peace, that wouldn't work,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
They would be resentful of that.
Yeah.
So, but it took me going through and doing my childhood work to really
Yeah.
change me. I needed just not to do the in the moment stuff. I actually had to go and change all my memories around my dad and my mum and let
Mm.
that go before I could just be my own person, right? Because otherwise, I'm really just reflecting those memories of my parents back onto my kids. And that's how things get
Yeah.
passed down through the generations.
Yes. Yes. I've had so many conversations about the generational trauma.
When you think about me saying that those thoughts were my dad's, right,
Yeah.
that had just been in my mind, but I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So that meant the things that I was thinking and the things that I was saying were coming from my subconscious, from my
Mm.
programming, from my parents. But I
Yeah.
wouldn't know that I was doing it. So most of the time, we don't know that we're doing it. And we don't
Yeah.
realize it's come from our parents. So yeah, it's worth doing this work just for that.
What's the saying? Isn't there a saying that was like, we all become our parents at some point? Like we all, and genetically speaking, we are our parents, bits and pieces from each one. But maybe this awareness of the generational trauma will maybe start to change a little bit as we become more aware of it. I think it will help break some cycles.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. We need to do that.
Yeah, for sure. So with the tapping, the EFT stuff, are there different points that do different things? Did you have a certain pattern that you followed, or depending on what type of emotion you were feeling, did you do something different? How did you discover what worked for you?
Yeah, EFT is a set of points, so it's the same points all
Okay.
the time.
Okay.
And those points cover the whole body. They're
Okay.
meridian points from kind of Chinese medicine, meridian points. Um, so that set of points is a series of 9 points. Some people add a couple here or there. They will basically cover the whole body. And what you're doing when you're tapping is you're creating an interrupt into your nervous system's normal response, right? So if you're triggered about something, and you tap, you're letting the nervous system realize it can do something different and
Okay.
it can release those emotions and those memories that are stored inside with that emotion or that trigger. And so next time you experience that emotion or that trigger, you won't feel the same way. It will feel different.
Okay.
And eventually, if you do that enough times, you will no longer be triggered at all, which
Mm.
is lovely.
So you just keep going through all the 9 points until you feel peace
Yeah,
or
or
release.
something shifts. Often it will. You kind of we're very layered, right? There's layer after layer. So you'll release the current layer,
Hmm.
and then maybe a memory will pop up or a different emotion will come to mind, and then you can work on that, or you can work on the memory that comes to mind, or you can just leave it there and then come back to it another point. But yeah, you're just releasing one layer at a time. That's why I did it. You can do it for 5 minutes, or you can do it for an hour.
Hmm.
And when I was going through an experience or trauma, I would talk to it like it's like a story, like I'm reading it from a book. Okay, this happened, then this happened, and I felt this way and that way. So just telling the whole story from beginning to end, tapping through it all the time,
Hmm.
stopping if the emotion comes too much, and staying with that emotion. So one of the kind of weird things is if tears start flowing, if I would start crying, I would keep saying the things that would keep the tears flowing,
Mm.
which sounds harsh. But those tears are stored in the body, right? So I wanted to release them. I wanted to let them go.
And
So
that's
I would,
part of feeling the feelings too, right? If you
right.
suppress the crying, I am a crier at everything. It would eat me alive to not cry when I need to cry. But some people don't, right? Some people don't cry. I have a friend who doesn't, she sometimes she's, I haven't cried in like forever and I've had sad things happening. I need to watch a sad movie or something to try to make it happen. So I understand that not everybody can or wants to cry. But I think that's part of feeling the feelings, right? Is letting the tears flow. Let it flow as much as it needs to.
Absolutely. I think all the tears that we've suppressed in childhood are still in there, being
Mm,
held inside, and they're
yeah.
still we if we find them, they're still there and they will come out.
Yeah.
Once we I mean, I used to also cry a lot, and now I hardly ever do because I've
Okay.
let all this emotion go and all these triggers go. So I'm just not triggered the way I used to be. So the tears, they just don't come.
Yeah. But that's a good thing. It's a healthy not coming, right?
It is. I believe the ultimate goal of all this work is imperturbability, right? To become imperturbable. It's a big word.
Yeah.
Where you can just be wherever you are and stay at peace. You're still at peace on the inside, regardless of what happens around you.
Yeah.
And the more we do this work, the more I do this work, the more I feel that is coming true.
Yeah. Did you find that the your community around you started shifting a little bit when you started doing this work?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it does. But I try not to avoid anything.
Sure.
When I started this work, I stopped watching the news. And a lot of
Mhm.
people do that, right? Because it's overwhelming. It can be overwhelming. But as I did more and more of this work, I realized I'm done with my childhood now, right? I'm done with these collective traumas. So what's next? What's the
Mm.
next deeper level of healing I can find? So I started watching the news again and
Oh.
paying attention to how I feel about what I'm hearing so that I could get to a deeper level. And it's in that process I realized, okay, we don't want to hide ourselves away from
Hmm.
negative things. We want to just let life happen,
Yeah.
and we need to work with what happens.
Mhm.
If you're listening to the news and some emotion comes up, don't switch it off. Just feel the
Yeah.
feelings, right?
That's so
And move
interesting.
through it. Yeah, that to me, each time those emotions come up, there's an opportunity for deeper healing and then deeper self-awareness.
Yeah. Has some of your family picked up on some of this stuff too? They do it too. I mean, you said
Not
you did it
really.
to your kids, but
Yeah, no, as they got older, they became more resistant to it. But I
well, they're
hold
not.
hopes.
Yeah, I think there's also a time and place for this stuff to come in and drop in, right? So,
You said your 30s, you weren't aware till your 30s. I wasn't aware till my late 30s,
and
right?
no
So
one in my family, love them all if they're listening to this, but no one in my family is really doing that kind of work. And part of the reason I asked you if your community had changed is because I've noticed the people that I am around now versus 5 years ago, even it's so dramatically different because I'm embarking on some of this stuff and people aren't wanting to face their healing journeys just yet. Our friendship petered out, and that's okay. There's chapters for everything. But I think it's
yeah.
interesting because I think when you start becoming more and more aware of that kind of stuff, everything around you changes.
So going back to part of that is also my husband, right? He doesn't do any of this. So I know other people who've started this kind of work and have left their partner
Oh,
because
yes.
they didn't want to experience that anymore. So instead of doing that, I've worked on myself, right? So if he's not doing something that I would like him to do, that's inside of me. That
Hmm.
feeling is inside of me, so I have to work on that. Right? Or
Yes.
if he said something to me that hurt me, that hurt is inside of me, so I have to do that. And when I
Mm.
change on the inside, he changes too.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so important. That's self-awareness in general, right? We need to be aware to make changes. We can't blame everyone else for all the problems. Also,
Absolutely.
I find when I find something that works for me, I really want to share it with everyone else. And I'm sure you feel the same way. You see the benefits for yourself and you just want everyone else to experience it. So you want to
Right.
share it with the world and scream it from the top of a mountain.
Yeah. And that's why I think social media is so good. So that's where my people are. That's
Yeah.
those are the people I can talk at a really deep level to, and that's
Yeah.
what I love. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's where I'm sharing. I want people to be able to release pain that's been
Mhm.
inside of them for years, right? This pain in my left cheek was so incredibly just so painful when I first became aware of it. And it had been there my whole life
Mm,
since I was born, right? From my foot, it started that twist is in my left cheek. And I hadn't been aware of it, right? But
mm.
now I know how to release it, right? Just focus on it, let it go, focus, let it go, focus, let it go. And shift the skull bones. Anyone can do that, right? It just takes work.
That's wild. I say that. I've heard so many stories and studies on the power of the mind, right? To change multiple parts of your body or whatever it may be. Our minds are very powerful. And when you really tap into it and sit and focus on it and become aware of it, I think it's fascinating what we can do. We do not give ourselves enough credit for that.
Absolutely, yeah. We have superpowers.
We do. We just don't know it.
Yes.
That's super interesting. What about any of your extended family? Has anybody else picked up on that?
No, and that's
No.
okay.
Yeah,
I,
yeah.
yeah, I just let it be okay. I do
Yeah.
think one day down the road they might, and that's okay too. But I just know I just take the responsibility for it myself. Whatever
Hmm.
happens, whatever any emotions that come up, that's all me.
Yeah.
That's all I can do. I can share my information. There will be people, there are people who are doing this
Yeah.
work. I have a good friend who's done it who can put her awareness inside her body now,
Mm.
which is really fun. And she's worked her way through different health issues that have come up. She can sit in it, she can feel it, she can relax into it, she can let it go. And it's just wonderful to hear her.
Do you guys get together and do that together?
We have done, but these days she's more working on it on her own, and she can
Yeah.
do it now, which is great.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't know if this was like this is a better solo venture or if you have a friend that's super into it too and you guys can do it together. I don't know. I feel like that would be fun.
Yeah, we can. I'm actually doing a retreat next year or 2025, my
Okay.
first retreat where we're going to be doing this in person over several days. And I
Okay.
think it will be pretty intense
Yeah.
because it is intense work. But I think it will help show people who want to do it how to do it.
Yeah. So is that something you're hosting yourself or are you a guest at?
Yeah, a friend and I are hosting it, and it's going to be for women who've lost a parent,
Okay.
primarily with it focusing on a mother's
Yeah.
relationship. But we'll be working through the trauma of the death, right? And the trauma of whatever traumas they had in childhood with the parent. And yeah, I think it'll be fun, it'll be intense, and it'll be fun.
Yeah. And where is that going to be?
It's going to be in Northern California in Santa Cruz
Okay.
in July 4th weekend.
Okay. Do you
Yeah.
still have open spots? Is that something I should link in the show notes?
Yes, yes, we do right now for sure. Yes, we've just put the sales page up.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very nice. Then we will link that in the show notes if anybody's interested in that. What other, I know you have your YouTube channel for teaching a lot of this stuff and talking about it in your own journey. What else are you doing with all of this?
I have my book that's called The Pathway to Insight. So
Okay.
that talks through the different steps, right? The EFT, working through those traumas, and then the feelings, and then feeling inside the body, and a workbook that goes with that.
Okay.
And I have my website, which has the x-rays on. So if anyone doesn't believe me or wants to see that
Yeah.
in more detail, you can go on there. And I'm pretty active on Facebook. I post, or have been posting something every day this year so far. And I try and explain other people's quotes and other people's phrases from my experience because I think I hope it's useful.
Yeah. Do you think this is something that you'll ever work with people one-on-one with or do a course on, or what are your future plans for this?
Yeah, I do. I have and do work with some people one on one. And
Okay.
I'm thinking of putting a course together based on the workbook because I realized that would be a really good thing to take people quickly,
Yeah.
intensely, if they want to do that. So, yes, hopefully that's coming up. But I think the retreats will be fun. I'd love to put more retreats on.
Yeah, I hear they're a lot of work, but I think they're definitely rewarding when people do them. I just interviewed a girl, I don't know, recently, and she does 2 or 3 or 4 a year in all different places, countries. I'm like, whoa, that's got to be so much work.
I bet it's easier with the second one. The first
Yeah,
one's a lot of
maybe.
work.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe with your first one, it's a lot of learning some
Yeah.
lessons, huh?
Absolutely, yes, a lot of learning, but thank goodness for Chat GPT. That's
It's
amazing.
changing my life. A fun life hack. This has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but I used it to fill out my ballot. It was so helpful with all the amendments and all the propositions and like all the things that I didn't understand. I typed it into Chat GPT. I'm like, I'm in Colorado Springs. Here's my ballot because we have different stuff on there based on the counties we live in and stuff too. And I was like, what does amendment or proposition blah, blah, blah mean? And it gave me a whole description in layman's terms of what it meant. And then it said people that are for this think blah, 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 blah. People who are against this think blah, 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 blah. And then it said a yes vote means this and a no vote means this. And I was like, saved me so much more time than researching it all on the internet.
What a great idea. I will do that next time.
Yes, fun life hack. Everybody do it next time if there's something like that you don't understand. Because it was obviously wasn't trying to sway me one way or the other either. So it was very, straightforward. And it was pulling it actually sourced some of the websites that it was pulling that stuff from too. So I knew it was like searching for all the different things and then put something together for me. But I'm telling you, ChatGPT can help in so many ways. A lot of people are afraid of the AI stuff, but
Yeah, to me that's part of the spiritual journey, right? We're all becoming one, right? Think
Mm,
how many things we can do individually now that we could not have done 5, 10 years ago.
yes.
So we're all being able to do these many things that we couldn't have done before. So yeah, to me it's the way it's supposed to be.
And that's a nice positive outlook on the internet, right? Because I think there's so many downsides to the internet these days and social media and stuff. But a nice way to look at it is we do have that's like a collective, so much information in one place. Even Facebook support groups and things like that. Like you can learn things in those groups that you may not have heard about otherwise. And then it can be something you can explore on your own. And that's a nice positive look at it.
Yes. Yeah, we've got to try and find those.
Yeah, for sure.
One thing I love people to know is that there is so much more depth to life than we realize.
Yeah.
I didn't know that when I started this journey. Right? I didn't know I could put my awareness inside my body, but it's not only that, right? It's as within, so without. So
Mm.
the deeper we know ourselves on the inside, the deeper we see and understand things on the outside, right? So I can see when someone else is holding themselves tight, when they're not breathing properly,
Oh.
right? When someone's not breathing deeply into their body, they're quite possibly not telling the truth because they're
Oh.
hiding something from their breath, right? There's all these other aspects to life that I had no idea about until I did this work. If anyone's feeling depressed or thinking life isn't worth it anymore, what am I going to do now? Things are changing so much. If you do this work, you will start to see and understand things at a level that you never knew was possible before because it wasn't available to you, right? But
Yeah.
as you do this work, it becomes available to you. So it's worth doing.
I didn't even think about how that would affect the way other people too. That's super interesting.
Yeah, but you've heard of the phrase as within, so without, right?
For sure. Yeah. But I
Right.
didn't
Yeah.
even, as we're sitting here talking about how this has helped you become more aware of yourself, I didn't even think that it would make you become aware of everyone else too. But that's super interesting too.
Yeah. And you start to understand why things are happening the way they're happening. It makes life more fun. You're
Yeah.
also lighter, right? I'm lighter, not necessarily physically lighter. I haven't lost weight, but I used to feel really heavy because I had all
Yeah.
that burden I was carrying around, right? Now I feel lighter, right? I
Yeah.
can laugh much more easily than I used to, right? Just, I'm much more peaceful throughout life. I'm just more joyous, peaceful, lighter.
Which
And
I think is really important as you get older too, to
yeah, I
feel.
would say it's important all the time, but
Yeah, sure. But I feel like we all yeah, our bodies start to break down as we get older. And so if you can do anything like that to help, obviously starting that at an earlier age is going to help even more. But I think definitely as we get older to loosen up some of that and be able to lift some of that burden is huge.
and it's not, we tend to think of perspective, right? As we get older, we get tighter, our perspective pulls in, right? It's like we have blinders on because we physically cannot even move our necks as much. So as I've
Mm.
released all of this burden, right, my neck and my head will move in all sorts of ways that it wouldn't move in before. My perspective has expanded. I can put myself in someone else's shoes, imagine what their life is like. Things that I probably couldn't do before. Is it okay to mention politics?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, when I started this journey, I had a lot of problems with the former president,
Hmm.
who's going to be the next president.
Yes.
Right now, I can see him, I can listen to him, I can put myself in his shoes. I
Mm.
had so much resistance to doing that a few years ago.
Yeah.
I I didn't even want to think about it, right? The idea of doing it was even repulsive,
Yeah.
right? I've released so much energy around that I can put myself in his shoes and imagine what he's doing, why he's doing it, right? And I can tap on it from his perspective, right? Which are things that I wouldn't even have thought about doing 10
That's
years
not
ago.
something I've thought about doing. And I know a lot of people that would really, they're going to be knocking down your door now to learn this skill, to be like, help me.
But it's all right. It's not just mental. It's mental, emotional, physical. They're all
Mm.
connected, right? And the looser we are on the inside, our physical bodies, the wider perspective we can see on the outside as well.
Mm. Yeah.
But we don't know that until we start doing the work
Oh my
because we
God.
can't see, we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're conditioned to just do our everyday life and go through it and not dive deeper into that stuff.
It's in our subconscious. We're
Mm-hmm.
programmed, our subconscious is programmed. And until we start pulling out of that, we can't see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, this work is so interesting. I had heard of the tapping stuff, the EFT, and I actually did it once with a gal, but it wasn't something that fully stuck with me. But I feel like she had just started looking into it and was like, let's try this. I think maybe working with somebody with a little bit more knowledge on it probably would have been helpful. But I think that's so cool that it helped you so much. And it sounds like you worked with the one guy on it in the beginning. And then did you mostly do it yourself after that?
I did, yeah. So one of the things I tell people about EFT is it's really important to use your own words. So
Mm.
that's why working with someone else isn't always great. And using those online scripts, many people use online scripts. So they give you the words to use, but
Okay.
those words are not the words that are stuck inside of you, right? You
Yeah.
need your own words and your own language. If you have a language that you grew up with, you'd want to tap using that language because that's what was instilled inside of you.
Mm.
So yeah, it's and sticking with the negative. A lot of the online videos they go to the positive. It's only
Mm.
the negative that's stuck inside of our body. So
Mm.
that's what we need to clear out. I don't bother with the positive. I just work on clearing out the negative because I can see inside, I can sense inside, and the tension, the darkness is that past. That's what's
Yeah.
stuck inside is the darkness. And when we release that darkness, the light's already there underneath. Right? So
Yeah.
we don't have to find the positive. We become more positive naturally
Yeah.
as we do this work, as our thoughts change, which is
Yeah. I just recently had a conversation with somebody about how, as human beings, we just focus on the negative so much more. And I'm guilty of it too. For example, I'm a hairdresser and I will have a week full of amazing clients. And if I have one that ruined my entire day, or, yeah, I guess that's the best example. I will focus on that one. And I have had my husband tell me a couple times, most of your clients are great. Why aren't you focusing on that? And I'm like, that's a really good point. But what are your thoughts on why we're so programmed to focus on and hold on to that negative physically?
because that's how we're taught to do it in childhood. That's how our
But
parents did
why? Why
it.
are they teaching us that?
Now, what I do is so some people would say, don't focus on that, focus on the positive, right?
Hmm.
I don't say that. You're focusing on it. Now, when you're focusing on it, you're going down the same neural pathways, right? You're kind of creating a rut inside of your mind and you're making that rut deeper and deeper as
Yeah.
you're focusing on it. So what the tapping does is it flattens out the rut, right? So you'd still focus on it, you still talk through that annoying customer, right, or whatever happened, but you would tap through it at the same time, and you would keep thinking about it and keep talking about it, until it no longer feels like it's anything important. Right?
Mm,
And then you let going, and then the thoughts shouldn't come up anymore, or they won't come up as often. And when
yeah.
they do, you can tap on them again.
Yeah.
And then eventually they'll just stop coming up.
This might be something I gotta try now.
Now, I do have 3 videos on my YouTube channel about EFT. I've got an EFT demo, I've got a words to use with EFT, and I think I've got one about the physical things that happen that show you that EFT is working, which
Okay.
is really nice. It's nice to get feedback from your body to
Yeah.
know that things are shifting. So, yeah,
Yeah.
maybe listen to those.
Amazing. Yeah, I will link those in the show notes as well so that people can, if anybody listening is interested in doing their own EFT practice, I think those are probably good resources. Oh, this conversation has been so enlightening, Anne. Thank you so much. Do you have any final parting words for my listeners?
Just start paying attention to how you feel during the day.
Mm,
Yeah, because that's the first step, always. That's the first step. And it's
yeah.
worth doing.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. All right, my dear. Thank you so much for this conversation. I really enjoyed it. And thank you for sharing your life story and traumas and all of that, because I know that's not an easy thing to do for people either to go back that. I appreciate that you've healed from it, but I think it's still probably not an easy thing to do. So thank you so much for doing that. And yeah, thanks for coming on.
Great. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks everybody for listening. We'll see you on the next one.